Our scripture this morning is from Exodus 15:22 through 27. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why the place is called Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" When Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood, he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made the decree and the law for them, and there he tested them. He said, "If you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you." Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water. Thank you, God, for the blessing of your word, and thank you for the blessing that will be on Dan's message this morning.
Thank you, Joyce. I want to start today by telling part of my story as we introduce this name of God, because I believe it can be helpful. But I also want to apologize because I know some of you have heard it before and some of you have heard it maybe several times before. So I apologize if it's too much repeat. But back in 2005, I had some surgery, and the surgery went rather smoothly and healed up from the surgery just fine. But that surgery, some of the things that took place, it became a catalyst for some sleeping problems. Now, some of you might have a problem of falling asleep, and so you get in bed and your brain kicks in high gear and you're thinking about everything and you're worried about everything and you toss and you churn and you wrestle. That wasn't my problem. My head would hit the pillow and I was out like a light, right? Clear conscience, soft pillow. Isn't that what they say, right? Clear conscience. Yeah, Amanda never liked that one either because she's one that'll toss and turn and have trouble falling asleep. But I would hit the pillow, and as far as I knew, from when I would go to bed to when I would wake up, I had a good night's sleep. The problem that I had was staying awake during the day. And so I'd have a good night's sleep, turn around, I'd get up and I'd usually go out for a run or whatever, and by 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm sitting down to start working and so on, and I was constantly having trouble staying awake. It was funny. I could go out and run. I could be active. As long as I was moving, I was good. But when I would sit down, I could hardly stay awake. It didn't matter whether it was reading for sermons or reading of any sort, sometimes sitting down to watch TV, driving from Colfax to Bloomington. At that time, I had to do it often for hospital calls, and I'd do one of these tricks. I'd be driving down the road. You ever do this? It's like, I press back this cheek, right? And you just start, it's like trying to stay awake because I could hardly keep my eyes open whenever I would sit down for long. And so I started that journey, and it began a quest for me. And so on that quest, of course, being a guy and all, the last thing I wanted to do was go to a doctor, right? Doctors are only if you need it. And so I'm setting out this quest. I'm like, what's going on? And I remember hearing on the radio one day that they said the most common sleeping problem was not being able to sleep during the night. The most common sleeping problem was staying awake during the day. I thought, kind of piqued my interest a little bit. And the number one reason for that? Dehydration. So I thought, well, that's easy enough to fix. I'll drink more water. The only thing that drinking more water solved for me was I got a little more exercise because I was like, man, now I can't get work done because I'm constantly going to the bathroom between falling asleep, right? And so water didn't do much good. And so I as much as I worked out and stuff and everything, I thought, well, maybe I'm not eating enough protein. So I added more protein to my diet. And then that didn't work, and so I changed, and I changed my diet altogether and the different types of food that I was eating. And that didn't work either, and I wasn't getting anywhere. So eventually, I did end up going to homeopathic, chiropractic type doctor, and got on some different supplements, and they did different things, and I would say I got better and I got worse. and I got better. You ever been in that cycle? Better and worse. You would try something new and it would be better, and then it would be right back down, and I found myself in this very discouraging cycle. Every time you thought, hey, I think we nailed it this time. Within 2 weeks, I was right back to the same old, same old, same old. And that's discouraging. And that's disheartening. So at that point, I finally broke down. I served on a great banquet team. It might have been Emmaus at that time. I don't remember where there was a surgeon on the team. And I remember the surgeon. He was a really great guy. He gave a wonderful talk and stuff. And during the course of that weekend, he took one look at me and goes, I can fix that. I was like, thanks, but no thanks, right? No allergy problems, no sinus problems and stuff. But he goes, I can fix that. Well, it took me 2 years, and I called him up. And I said, would you order a sleep study? Or do you order sleep? And so he ordered a sleep study, and I went in, and I'm sitting there talking with the guy who's hooking me up to all these wires and everything. And as he hooks me up to all these wires, I'm talking. I said, you know what? I said, I don't think I ever hit deep sleep. He's like, well, why do you say that? I said, because I don't ever have a recollection of dreaming. He goes, well, that's the myth and go on and stuff. And we were talking, and he said, the one thing you don't have is sleep apnea. Because, sleep apnea is most often fat that kind of blocks off the airway and stuff. And the one thing I didn't have was a whole lot of fat, and I was pretty lean and stuff. He goes, the one thing you don't have is sleep apnea. Well, sure enough, I did the sleep study, and what does it say? Had a little bit of sleep apnea. To his surprise, to everybody's surprise, went back to the guy who ordered the sleep study. He didn't want to put me in no mask, Reese. He not only wanted to fix my nose, he wanted to take out my tonsils and remove my uvula, which is that little dangly thing there. And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, if he just wanted to fix my nose, I probably would have done it. I was like, that seems a little bit extreme to me. And not only extreme, pretty final. And I was like, I don't have allergy problems. I don't have sinus problems. I'm like, let me do a little more research. So the quest continued. So I did a little more research, and I found out about this dental device. And some of you know about this. Pulls the jaw forward, opens the airway. And once again, this cycle up and down, good nights, bad nights, and so on. And from that, I really got into reading about food as medicine. Amanda and Hannah loved that one, let me tell you. They loved that one. And so I went through this experiment. 2 months, I think, no sugar, period. Added sugar, didn't need it, period. Anything processed, didn't need it, period. Dropped 15 pounds like boom, and the sleep apnea disappeared. My sleeping problem didn't, but the sleep apnea did, according to the sleep study. Thought, well, that's interesting, right? Thought that's interesting. But some of you who were with us in that journey, everybody was saying, you need to put some weight on, right? Because I was like, still are. So that wasn't the problem either. And then one day, there was a conference going on in Champaign, and I kind of saw it, and I was like, I couldn't go the first day. I couldn't go the last day. There was only one day in the middle that I could have even thought about attending anything. And so I'm like, I just kind of pushed it aside. And I thought, no, I'm not going to. And a guy from Colfax called me up like 2 days prior. He said, hey, are you going? I said, no. I said, I really can't attend most of it. And so I just I said, it sounded kind of interesting, but I'm not planning on going. He goes, well, why not just come for the one day? And I thought, well, why not? I said, it's my day off. I'm really in good place this week. I only work 1 hour a week anyway, right, Jason? And I thought, why not? I'll just go for the one day. So I went for the one day, and it was pretty good. And that evening, they had Randy Clark had come in to do teaching. And at the end of his teaching, he went into healing ministry. And so at the end of the teaching, he started giving words. And he said, there's somebody here, and he was this specific. And I know this is outside of the norm and the comfort zone for many of us, right? But he was this specific. He said, there's somebody here that if you go down your sternum and go over about 2 inches, you have a pain right there. And if that's you, I want you to stand up. He said, there's somebody here that if you look at your ankle, your left ankle, and it's right here on the side. If that's you, I want you to say. And he was that specific. He didn't just say, there's somebody here with a pain in your back. He'd say, there's somebody here with a pain. If you go to this vertebrae, he was that specific. And he said, if that's you, I want you to stand up. And I remember I was sitting there in my chair, and I was thinking to myself, okay, this is a little odd and a little different. I remember thinking that to myself, and then I remember thinking, they never deal with things like sleep apnea. If he says sleep apnea, I'll get up. And it's kind of that skeptics kind of attitude you ever had. It's like, if he says something about sleep apnea, I'll stand up then, but he'll never do it. Imagine my surprise when he says, there's a Jasmine here with sleep apnea. If that's you, I want you to stand up. Now, this was a room of 760 people, I think is what they said was registered. I can tell you, I didn't know anybody there except for the guy who called me and asked if I wanted to go. And there was nobody there who knew I had sleep apnea. I can tell you that the registration form had nowhere indicated, do you have anything you would like to find healing from? There's only one place that could have come from. There's a Jasmine here with sleep. Now, I'll tell you, I jumped up quicker than you could believe, right? And I was like an excited little boy on the way home. He's like, there's a Jasmine here with sleep apnea. Now, with that said, since that day, have all my sleeping issues been resolved? Not really. Better, but not completely resolved. But what I can say is I've made new discoveries. I've grown closer to God. I've learned things about myself, and it's been a fascinating journey as I've been coming better to know Yahweh Rapha, the Lord who heals, or the Lord our physician. And I've testified to people several times since, and in fact, some of my new discoveries is there's been more that was going on than just sleep apnea. So I'll tell them, I said, the sleeping issues aren't all resolved, but what I can tell you that I no longer have is sleep apnea. Have I gone and been tested? No, I'm like, that's too specific. And so I'm like, there's other things we're dealing with, we're addressing. But I said, I believe in my heart that the sleep apnea has been taken care of. Now, what I've also found in this journey is I've been able to help other people because of the things that I've learned. In fact, at Four Seasons, I became the nutrition expert. Everybody was always coming and talking about different foods and nutrition and different things because it just, from the journey that I was on, I kind of became a popular guy at the juice bar. And they all came to me with their questions. So when we speak of the Lord who heals, Yahweh Rapha, it's somewhat of a challenge because it raises many questions for us. For instance, if we believe that God can and that God desires to heal, then why doesn't he do it more frequently? Why here and not there? Why me and not you? Or why you and not me? We get into all sorts of questions. What does healing look like? And why doesn't everyone experience divine healing when they're prayed for? And so when we talk about the Lord who heals, we get this first challenge with all these questions that people have, especially when they've been dealing with something chronic over a long period of time. And so some people, they don't like questions because questions are messy. Questions are ugly. And so rather than dealing with what's ugly and questionable and what doesn't make sense, they go the easy route and they want to discount healing altogether. It's simply easier that way. So we're just going to say, oh yeah, that was New Testament. God did it then, but God no longer does it. It ended with the apostles. That's smooth, it's clean, it's easy, and that's where they want to jump to. Because it's a lot easier than saying, why does God heal here and not here? Others, they will limit God to healing through the medical profession. So God will work through doctors and God will work through, and I believe he does, right? But they'll limit, and they'll say God can work through the medical profession, but they really don't expect to see anything miraculous. They might just expect that, it might come a little bit quicker as you go through the proper means. And then you have others who are on the other extreme, right? And they pretty much declare God desires and God can, and so be healed. And when you find yourself in those circles, they don't say, God, if you're willing, please heal. Or God, work through the doctors and the surgery. What they say is, pain be gone, right? Tumor be gone, cancer wither. Trust me, I know, because that's how they prayed in Nepal, right? And they pray with command and the authority of Christ. And many of you have heard about last year's mission trip to Nepal, where we literally saw miraculous healings. 466 confirmed miraculous healings. And I can testify personally, because we had teams spread out, and I can testify personally to some that we experienced. I remember one of the first ones we saw was a lady who couldn't hear. who it's on videotape. The translator, after she was healed, kept stepping back, and he said, having her repeat after him, kept stepping back, kept stepping back, kept stepping back, and then he's like, turn around. And she was in disbelief about how far back he was that she can hear, and he wasn't yelling at her, speaking normally. And some of you have heard me tell a story about the lady's tumor that I felt just disappear underneath my fingers. Now, that's pretty cool stuff. And, some of us would say, well, that's just over there, right? It's not just over there. Might be more prevalent over there. Last Sunday, we had the joy of loading a truck for Mark and Monica. And, in the midst of loading a truck for Mark and Monica, here Mark, this big, beastie guy, right, dealing with garage doors all the time, all this heavy stuff, and pulling these springs, big bulky guy and all. And so what's he do? He throws up some stuffed animals up in the truck, and he's like, ah, right? We don't know what he did, only that he did it. And I think it was something, it wasn't even something heavy, was it, Mark? I don't think it was anything heavy. He throws it up, and so then he's trying to load this truck, and he's like doing this thing. And he's going around, he's going like, and we're like, well, this is funny. So Monica goes to get some Advil, and Mark is standing right outside the truck, and I just went over to him, and I laid my hand on his shoulder, and I prayed for him. And what happened, Mark? The pain was gone. Honestly, I didn't expect it to happen either, right? Sometimes we pray and we really don't expect, but it was gone. And throughout the rest of the day, I remember we were loading this truck, and Mark would just go, it's gone. Kind of like he didn't expect it to happen either, right? But it was gone. Yahweh Rapha, the Lord who heals. Healing can be enigmatic, because sometimes it's instant. No doctor required. Sometimes there's no explanation outside of the power and the act of God. Other times it's a process, and God kind of works through doctors or medications, whatever the case may be. But, even when you look in the scriptures, healing is kind of this enigmatic thing that's not clear-cut. And so we have, you might remember in the Old Testament, Naaman, who comes to Israel and he's healed of leprosy, while all the lepers in Israel remain in leprosy. In fact, some of the people of Israel, they didn't like to be reminded of that, how God healed outside of their nation while all these sick were in their nation. You can look at somebody like Paul, and Paul, we see all these miraculous healings that take place through by God's Spirit through the hands of Paul. And we even see Paul had this one day that he preached longer than me, right? And this guy was sitting in the window, and he fell asleep, right? He must not have been as interesting as me, right? So Eutychus falls out the window 3 stories high, and Paul raises him from the dead. And then he goes on preaching like nothing had happened, right? Let's finish the story. And so we see all these miracles that happen through Paul, and yet Paul had a thorn in the flesh, and he entreats God to remove the thorn in his flesh, and what does God say? God says no. And Paul says, I learned that his grace is sufficient even in my weakness. So here you have Paul, a person through whom God brought healing, and yet he suffers from his own infirmity. Isn't that interesting? Timothy, who is a partner of Paul, a minister with Paul. Remember Timothy? I remember telling a Lutheran girl one time, he said, in the Bible it says wine's good for digestion. And she goes, no, it doesn't. So I went and I got my Bible, and I looked up, and for Timothy, I said, right here it is. When Paul says, drink this because it's good for your ailments. You know what that means? It means God didn't miraculously heal Timothy either. He used natural things to help remedy, but he didn't heal him. He had Epaphroditus, another person who did wonderful things for Paul, who was sick unto death and was grieving all their hearts. Now, Epaphroditus did recover, but it appears as though he did it normally through the natural means, right? And so Paul was rejoicing. So you have these cases where sometimes God healed, sometimes God didn't. Now, incidentally, I don't know anybody from the New Testament that's still alive today, do you? Jesus, yeah. Jesus is the only one, right? You know what that means? It means somewhere, somehow, somebody didn't get healed, right? They all died eventually. They all died eventually. So how do we understand this powerful name of God that's revealed to us at Exodus 15? Incidentally, I'm trying to be in competition with Paul and with Eutychus today, right? I told Amanda, I said, well, he's a little bit long in the rehearsal, so we'll see what happens on Sunday morning. But just to give you a fair warning, right? In Exodus 15, I am the Lord who heals you. Lockyer states, the word heal means to mend as a garment is mended, to repair as a building is reconstructed, and to cure as a diseased person is restored to health. And then you kind of add to that fact that healing could be physical, it could be spiritual, it could be emotional, it could be relational. And we really have many different facets of how we might experience the touch of Yahweh Rapha. And it might be that we seek God for healing in one respect and we find healing in another. In fact, I really believe that's kind of some of my own journey when I came to the place of saying, God, if my sleep problem brings more glory to you than healing me, then leave it be. I believe that's a moment of healing too. I truly do. And like I said, it's been an interesting journey. So how do we understand the touch of Yahweh Rapha? Well, first, let me assure you that the absence of healing does not indicate that you are necessarily outside of the will of God. Now, it's possible. I don't want you to go there. So I was like, well, I could live however I want, but just because there's an absence of healing does not mean that you're outside of the will of God. Doesn't mean that you are in it, but doesn't mean you're outside of it. So how do I know that? Well, look at Job. Job, obviously not outside the will of God, went through great suffering, right? Look at Paul, who was not outside the will of God and yet had his thorn in the flesh. Look at Timothy, who was very active in ministry and yet had some ailment of the digestive system. Look at the blind man in John chapter 9, whom everybody wanted to point their finger at and say, whose sin is it that caused him to be born blind? And Jesus said, it's not for sin, but for the glory of God. Now, did he recover sight? Absolutely, but it was years, right? Lifetime. So we know that the absence of healing does not indicate that you're necessarily outside the will of God or that somehow God is displeased with you. Now, on the other hand, what we can look at is that it might mean that there are lessons to learn or that God wants to reveal himself to you in a different way than maybe you're expecting at that point in time. Have you ever questioned God? Most of us probably have, right? We've gone through things, we've questioned God. Israel certainly did. I certainly have. In my journey, there were certainly times that I questioned God. It's particularly easy to question when God doesn't seem to make sense, when things aren't always cut and dry, when it's not clear, and life hits us with the unexpected. And so as we look at our text today where God reveals himself as the Lord who heals, he has just brought the people out of Egypt. And as he brings them out of Egypt, God kind of looks at the destination and the possibilities for getting there, and he says to himself, he says, there's the short way and there's the long way. And he says, you guys aren't ready for the short way. The short way means war with the Philistines. You're not quite ready for that. That's a trial you're not ready to bear. So we're going to go a different direction. And he takes them the long way. And incidentally, he even has a moment where they kind of backtrack. And what happens is they get pinned in by the Red Sea on one side and the Egyptians on the other side. The Egyptians start to get their brains going here. And they're thinking, all of our labor just left. We're going to have to do things for ourselves. And so they decided they didn't like that anymore, right? So they're penned in by Egypt on the one side and by the Red Sea on the other side. And so what do? Their natural default. They grumbled and they complained. They grumbled and they complained. Why did you bring us out here? Isn't it interesting? God does wonderful things for us. And the first sign of trouble, we grumble and we complain and we get irritated and we forget all the blessings, right? So they grumble and they complain, and God parts the Red Sea. That's chapter 14. We come to the end of chapter 14, verse 31. When the Israelites saw the great power the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. You see the Red Sea part, it's pretty easy to say, I think I'm going to fear this God, I'm going to trust him. Chapter 15 then begins with praise for God, verses 1 through 21. We have this song of Moses and Miriam as they give God praise for what he has done, for the triumph in the Lord. And I don't know about you, but you see the hand of God work in such a powerful way, in such a wonderful way, and it might be easy to begin thinking at that point, life is going to be good. Life is going to, God has us covered. God has our back. Look what God can do. Finally, things are looking up. Goodbye problems, hello blessings. If only it were that easy, right? And we come to verse 22. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. Now, the first thing we need to understand is that they're at Marah by design, not by accident. They've been led here. And let's not pretend that Moses is really the one doing the leading, right? Because God has been leading Moses by a pillar of fire by night, by a cloud by day. God has been leading his people, and he has brought them into this place where they've gone 3 days into the desert without finding water. The very God who just 3 days earlier parted the Red Sea has led them now into a time of drought. So 3 days, they're looking for water. Their heart's set on water. This isn't how they expected. I mean, wow, we just saw God do this. What, can he manufacture water? What's going on here? 3 days they've been going, and then they see it in the distance. Water. Can you just imagine what must have happened in their hearts? Water. Their hearts had to leap for joy, excitement. We're going to live, right? Water. Then, of course, we hit verse 23. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That's why the place is called Marah. There's few things that are as difficult as hope that's been removed, destroyed, dashed, as disappointment, discouragement, disillusionment comes in. We had hoped, we were on this cycle, things were starting to look good, and we're down again. It's like every time there's a victory, there's a setback, there's a roadblock, there's an obstacle. And so what do the people do? The same thing they always did. First sign of problems, first sign of difficulty, they grumbled at Moses. Because it's easier to grumble at Moses than it was to grumble at God, right? So they grumbled at Moses because it's easier to take it out on the messenger. You might think, what happened to their trust? It's only been 3 days. 3 days since they saw the parting of the sea. 3 days since it says that they feared the Lord and put their trust in him. Now, to be fair, we probably wouldn't have done much better. Let's face it, life can be hard, life can be difficult, life can be full of disappointments and disillusionment. It's certainly unfair. Amanda had the experience in high school of a teacher punishing the whole class for what 2 people did. So Amanda stood up and she goes, "Well, that's not fair." And his response to that, he curtly told her, "Life isn't fair, honey. Life isn't fair." She loved it. I thought it happened all the time. I'd heard the story so many times. I actually remembered it. But along the way, we become wounded. Hearts can become embittered. Our faith may even come into question. This isn't how it's supposed to be. This isn't what I expected. This isn't what I thought God would do. Don Kessler, he writes, the person with a discontented heart has the attitude that everything he does for God is too much and everything God does for him is too little. That's quite a telling quote, isn't it? The people complained. Verse 25, Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made a decree and a law for them. And don't miss the next line. And there he tested them. Remember, they're there by design, not by accident. One purpose of a test is to reveal what is yet unseen. There's certain things that we can't know about our hearts until it's tested. And same goes for faith. We really don't know how strong our trust, how strong our faith is until it's tested. Tony Evans writes, and I quote, he said, "My heart might feel fine to me, but it might not actually be fine. The doctor can determine the strength of my heart only by measuring it under stress." Some of you have had this blessed journey, right? So he creates a stressful situation. He tests my heart to determine whether the way I feel is really how I am, because I could have good feelings but still have a bad heart. Living the Christian life is no different. You can come to church every week, sing worship songs, memorize Bible verses, serve on a variety of committees, and assume your heart, your faith, and your soul are strong. You can say, "I love you, God. You are so good. I'll follow you. I'll do whatever you say." But God doesn't simply take your word for it. He tests you. And he tests me because he wants what is best for us. He tests us because he's getting ready to do something amazing in our lives. He tests us by putting us in stressful situations, just as he did with the Israelites. He tests us to reveal whether we're truly looking to him or if we're looking elsewhere. When you think about it, we don't know how selfish we are until we're put to the test. We don't know how unloving we can be until that unlovable person is standing right before us. We don't really know how forgiving we can be until we have somebody we need to forgive, right? It's the test that reveals what's unseen. We cannot know if we're truly able and willing to walk by faith until that faith is tested, and we have to believe without first seeing. God brought them to Marah, and there he tested them. Now, the other piece we need to understand with this is you can be in God's will even though you're going through a spiritually dry season. You can be in God's will even though you're going through a spiritually dry season. The desert was part of the journey, and it was part of the avenue for learning another name for God, the name the Lord who heals. In verse 25, we see how Moses cries out. God shows him a piece of wood. He throws it into the water, and the water becomes sweet. God can transform bitter trials into healing streams. And he can translate wounds into avenues for ministry when we allow him to address and to heal our brokenness. What we fail to realize sometimes is that trials are necessary to know God more deeply. And also that sometimes God's view on healing may differ from our view on healing. And there may be places that we need healing more deeply than we realize. When we ask the question, why heal sometimes and not at others, I was kind of wrestling with that a little bit, because that's certainly one of the big questions that comes up. And I don't think this is an answer that fits every situation, but at least perhaps some. And that's that it's possible that physical healing may at times conflict with a greater spiritual good. That's one we don't normally think about, right? But think for a moment. Who did we learn the most about grace from and through? Through Paul, who through a thorn in his flesh learned that God's grace is sufficient. And his message on grace has touched lives ever since, hasn't it? I don't know, how many of you know who Joni Eareckson Tada is? Only a couple of you, right? Joni Eareckson Tada is a paraplegic, right? Quadriplegic, sorry. And yet she has a ministry that goes worldwide. It's from her brokenness, from her wounds, that she's been able to minister to countless other lives. Sometimes physical healing may conflict with a greater spiritual good. Part of it depends on, are we learning to trust God? I remember Amanda used to tell Hannah that she had 3 jobs. She would say this to Hannah: my jobs are to keep you safe, to keep you healthy, and to teach you how to be a good girl. Look what God says to his people in verse 26. He says, if you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. He says, I've given you my decrees to keep you safe, to keep you healthy, and to teach you how to be good. And he clearly links, at least at one level, obedience In fact, it's interesting. He says, listen carefully, pay attention. He says, do what's right in my eyes, keep all my decrees. I think that's repetition, right? Repetition means there's importance, right? And he links obedience with overall health. Now, we need to understand that the promise does have limitations. He does not promise in this verse that you'll never be sick. Keep all my decrees and you'll never have a cold. Keep all my commands and you'll never have. That's not what he says. What does he say? I will not bring upon you the diseases that I put on the Egyptians. I will not bring upon you the plagues that I put on the Egyptians, right? So there is this connection with health, but it's not the promise that there will never be any sort of sickness. But there is a correlation between sin and sickness as well. Now, if it were not for sin, there would be no sickness. If Adam and Eve had not sinned in the garden, then we wouldn't have to deal with a lot of the stuff we have to deal with, right? Except for the fact that if they didn't blow it, we would have, right? But we do need to understand that not all sickness is the result of personal sin. Just because you're sick doesn't mean that's because of a sin you committed. It's because we live in a fallen world. It's because we live in a fallen world. Sometimes I joke around about the Jasmine Pharmacy because we have all sorts of leftover supplements. We went the homeopathic route for many things, and sometimes you're on something for a little while, then you're not. Sometimes you just forget it's there, and you don't end up taking it the way you're supposed to. And so I joke about the Jasmine Pharmacy. We have these leftover supplements that have been prescribed but never imbibed, right? And so I kind of kid around and say, it only does you good if you take it. Doesn't do any good sitting on the shelf. And the same's true here, right? God's laws, God's decrees, they only help when we follow them as prescribed, when we take it in and we live by it. And he says, as you do this, he said, I am the Lord who heals you. Healing has many faces. When physical trials no longer result in spiritual crisis, that's a form of healing. When you learn to walk by faith through the spiritual droughts and the dryness in life, that's a form of healing. When bitter trials are turned into healing streams, when broken hearts are mended, when severed relationships are restored, and when physical disease is cured. As Christians, we could even come and say there's healing in death. Because Christ has taken away the bitterness of death, hasn't he? Victory. But where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? We have victory even in death. God brings healing even through death because of the cross of Jesus Christ. I guess as we look at this name of God, let us not limit how God may choose to heal, but know that as we align ourselves with him, as we come to know Yahweh Rapha, the Lord who heals you, the Lord who is your physician, physically, emotionally, spiritually, he is a God who heals, and let's not limit how he might do so, but trust as we walk in him. Amen. In your bulletins, you have